Greetings and welcome back to another edition of Perspectives. I am here with my non-subscriber. I won't get into why that's the case. John Doe, who is a Polish citizen and someone who's quite knowledgeable about Poland. And at the moment, Poland is going through a lot of spasms, you might want to call them, with the rest of Europe, in particular the EU. And I think it's been an interesting discussion talking about Poland in the aftermath of the fall of the Iron Curtain, i.e. the fall of communism, the fairly recent historic events that shaped it and led to essentially a different perspective on Europe and their own identity, as well as the status of Poland in the context of the European Union and the general Polish mentality. So, John Doe, thank you for joining me. Now, I guess the first question to pose to you would be, Poland used to be a member of the Eastern Bloc nations like Hungary and some of the others. Obviously, in contrast to Western Europe, Poland experienced the Iron Curtain, what it was like under communism. And after having been under that Iron Curtain, and the curtain was sort of pulled back, that almost certainly left an impact on Polish society, culture, and the mentality and how they view themselves and the rest of Europe. One thing that's been pretty easy to observe is that Poland, and I think this is what a lot of the dispute is about, has been very resistant to absorbing migrants. They seem to be, for better or worse, I'm not passing judgment on this, quite xenophobic. Like I said, it's not really good or bad. And I think a lot of this might have to do with the circumstances that Poland existed under during the communist regime. So maybe if you could tell us a little bit about that, how things evolved in the aftermath of that, that'd be a good way to start.
Okay, then, first of all, thank you very much for having me.
Siema kurwa, in the international greeting, Polish greeting.
Kurwa jego mać, indeed. Now, so you want me to start with communism or the migrant crisis?
Well, because I don't think it's an either or. The way Poland is currently reacting to the so-called migrant crisis, as well as EU quotas on accepting X number of migrants, it strikes me as perhaps part of the legacy of something that can go back to the communist era and the aftermath. I mean, when Eastern Europe, because of this history, or decades of this history, was shaped by very different forces, I think. There's not a single Eastern European country I can think of, and I'm not really an expert on any of them, but when I think of countries like Poland and Hungary, Slovakia, etc., that it has that same sort of quote-unquote open mind, and I'm using that sarcastically, as Western Europe, just everything goes and you can do whatever you want. People are more suspicious, they're more cautious, etc. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how that's grounded in the history of Poland, the recent history of Poland and communism.
Yeah, okay, so first of all, I sort of agree with that kind of framing of the question, and I'm going to get to why just sort of in a moment. But there is certainly not to be said for communism's influence on modern day mentality of the Polish, and as you said, I'm certain of most of the other so-called Eastern Bloc countries. The biggest thing that relates to the migrant crisis, at least, I think, is simply that they're poor. I mean, maybe I'm missing something, but I think it mostly amounts to that. The Polish, and I'm sure the Lithuanians, the Hungarians, whoever, they're just really conscious about the fact that they can't fucking afford that. They can't afford to have, 250,000 people just thrown in, I don't know, Warsaw next Monday. I mean, that's, of course, a simplification of what that would look like, but they don't think that they can afford that. And by they, I don't necessarily mean the governments. I mean the electorates, which in turn means that the governments cannot afford to accept migrants because they'll simply lose their.
Right, but I mean, this is in a lot of ways a direct result of having been under decades of the Iron Curtain. The fact
Yes, yes,
that
exactly.
economies there quite possibly could have developed more along Western lines, but because it was actively suppressed due to ideological concerns and what have you, I don't begrudge the Polish or any so-called Eastern Bloc country that at all. But it also, I think, it, poor as Poland might be in some of these other countries compared to Western Europe at least, it gives the Polish and other Eastern European countries a unique sense of awareness, which is to say, I'll walk by occasionally some of these Amnesty Internationals and UNICEF people, and these people are just telling you, yeah, just 500 euros a year, all you need to do, and then to help, I don't know, Macumba or whatever.
Yeah.
The There's a kind of blissful ignorance that's highly pervasive throughout, at least in Germany, and
Hmm.
and at least by earshot and some of the things I read about online throughout a lot of the Western European countries, there's just everyone can afford anything. Everyone can, foot the bill for migrants and help all the poor and starving children in the world, and a notion that resources are fairly unlimited towards that end. And I think when you come from that background of having very limited means, you're much more perceptive in some ways about what's actually going on.
Oh, for
I
sure,
don't
for sure.
think any Eastern European person who's grew up there. I'm Eastern European too, but I didn't grow up there.
Yeah.
Is is lost in what I would call this sort of miasma of, oh yeah, we'll just help the world and throw bills at people. And this is a very Western European thing, and to a lesser extent a sort of American thing, but it's a very Western European thing to think that just we can help everyone and there's an unlimited amount of resources. Yeah.
Yeah, you're spot on, actually. You're really spot on. I put it like that. All the white guilt thing, all the, oh, we were horrible colonizers, and that means we have to help the poor Africans or whatever, that just doesn't exist.
Well, you're not white according to some people, so
I guess. But
Uh,
it's simply in the mentality, and
yeah.
well, it also is rather evident if you look at the history why that would be the case.
Hmm.
But uh, as you said, people just don't think about, uh, let's say, the migrants from Syria, or yeah, most of them aren't from Syria, but whatever. Let's say that they're from Syria. Uh, there is no feeling of, oh my God, we have to help them. We're the only ones in the world that can help them. Let's save the world. Oh, aren't we so great?
Hmm. I can't help but think it's
Yeah.
also sort of goes beyond communism. Eastern European countries throughout history, the last few centuries, at the very well, even going back well past a millennium, we're always at that, I guess, cutoff of having that border, that invisible line of dealing essentially with the non-European hordes. I mean, Hungarians are technically non-European hordes,
Yeah, most
died
certainly, most certainly.
over 1,000 years ago, but that having to deal with that, maybe historically almost, has implanted a sense of suspicion in Eastern European people.
Well, that may very well be the case. I mean, I believe Poland was the westernmost place that the Mongols reached. I mean, that was a
Yeah,
long time ago, but
yeah.
it just goes to show.
Yeah, Western
Uh,
Europe has been spared a lot. I mean, Western European nations did a lot of damage to each other, but a lot of the things that occurred, I mean, we talk about the Battle of Vienna, which, famously the Poles had come to the aid of the Austrians, I believe, in 1683, where the Ottoman Turks had pushed as far as Vienna. Thankfully, they were defeated. But this kind of legacy of having to deal essentially with what I would call bullshit in many different forms,
yeah.
military, political, it creates a type of suspicion that you can't really replicate in the West because, I mean, the Western Europe, it's weird, like I I don't know what I call. I mean, I guess I'm a European. I mean, ethnically, I'm Eastern European, but I've certainly spent much more time in Western Europe, and so I can observe it. And
Mhm.
people are kind of living in a sense of sort of blissful ignorance.
Oh man,
They for
just go to Switzerland. You'll never see
I've
anything
been to
like that.
Switzerland. Yeah,
It's insane.
yeah, yeah. So they're, I mean, whether it's Germany and or the Netherlands, they're just living in a different world. I see these people who they literally walk up to me like UNICEF, like you just need to give 500 euros a year. I can't afford that. I wouldn't even want to spend the money on helping Mustafa or whatever.
Yeah,
But
who is Mustafa?
exactly, well, or Muhammad or
Yeah,
whatever.
whoever.
So what I find is really striking, John Doe, is that unlike, I mean, maybe it's because it's less recent, but up until really just at the end of but basically 1945, when the war, the Great War, World War II, officially
Mhm.
ended. So, I mean, we're talking about the most destructive conflict ever, you know,
Yes.
and prior to that, just all kinds of internal conflicts, the Great War, World War One, and then fights through for economic reasons, protectionism and mercantilism, and all these other things, and it's like Western Europe has just sort of glossed over and totally forgotten the history that preceded what we have now. Those of us who live in Western Europe, even though I'm not technically a Western European, it's very strange. And then I'm aware of that, if only because I used to be a student of history and I'm interested in that. But if I try to have a conversation with people, you know, in Germany or, I mean, quote unquote, normal people, it they just don't have a clue what I'm talking about. And it's like it's all been sort of parts of it have been swept under the carpet and others have not. And yet, I was talking to my father's Hungarian friend a couple of maybe about a month ago on the Skype, and you know he describes the situations that's just very different in Hungary, and I'd imagine
Mhm.
it's reasonably similar in Poland. People are just very wary, they're very cautious, and I think in this day and age that's actually more useful than this sort of glossed over ignorance that you know we're all going to sing kumbaya and everything's going to be fine. There's no guarantee of that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's really easy to label it as just bigotry and you're horrible. But I mean, I'm sure there's some of it somewhere. I mean, I haven't been in Poland for years, but now I mean, I have been, but not for very long. Uh, I obviously
So you're
follow
kind of
what's
like me.
happening.
You're an Eastern European living in Western Europe, and you notice things that
Yes,
maybe
yes,
Western Europeans wouldn't notice.
uh, very possibly. I would imagine that's a very good way of putting that. And the interesting thing about Poland, and I imagine a lot of Eastern European countries at least, is that when they entered the EU, and it's certainly very true about Poland, when they entered the EU, lots of young people just, well, left because why the fuck wouldn't they?
Right. Better
And
opportunities.
exactly. And came either here where I am in France or the British Isles or wherever. Uh, and being foreigners, being uh, raised somewhere else, I think they have generally a better sense. Well, not better sense, but it's easier for us, I guess, because I technically am one of them. It's easier for us to, uh, I hope, be objective about uh, Western Europe and probably also to some degree Eastern Europe, although possibly less. Um, and
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, what seems to have happened, uh, or rather, what seems to be happening if you look at the Polish political scene lately, is that surprisingly to all the progressive media in Poland, because we have our progressive media, they're different,
Really.
but they exist.
Okay.
They are quite different, but they are mimicking the Western progressive media, is more accurate to say. They're not actually the same kind of thing, but they're similar enough. Uh, and what they have been saying for years is that, oh, this horrible right wing Nazi, whatever, current is gonna die out. You're just dinosaurs. You're all gonna die, and well, Poland will be better for it. And what seems to be happening, at least that seems to be the trend right now. The youth are unpredictable to say the least, but what seems to be happening is that young Poles are voting right. Whatever right means, but they are voting what's seen as right.
Nationalist. Right is, I think, increasingly a very poorly defined term. When you look at the alt-right,
yeah,
a lot
for
of them have essentially socialist policies. I mean,
certainly.
so maybe just nationalist parties, nationalist political organizations might be a better way of describing it.
Yeah, the party that won the last election in October, was it last year in Poland? I mean, they describe themselves as a right-wing party, or an association of multiple right-wing parties, actually. But whatever. I personally would describe them as left-wing nationalists.
Yeah, and I think that's actually the trend. That is pretty much the trend.
Yes, certainly
Left-wing
Marine Le Pen in
nationalism.
France.
That's Marine Le Pen in France. I don't know if the alternative for Germany. I'm not sure you could describe them necessarily. To be fair, I'm not an expert on their economic policies, but there might
have
not.
economic policies.
Oh, the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, they're not that bad compared to things like the Front National or some of these others. But yeah, the thing is though, at the moment there seems to be a lot of conflict between the EU and Poland because Poland is going on about being a sovereign nation and can make decisions for itself.
Yes.
And Brussels is saying, well,
fuck you.
Right. If you're part of the European Union, you have to concede certain points and you have to agree and accede to certain things. And there's certainly a conflict of interest. There's no doubt that young Polish people have benefited from, say, things like labor mobility.
Certainly.
No, in the United Kingdom, I mean, after Brexit, there were even Polish people assaulted. There's a lot of tension there too. There's even a Polish enclave in Iceland I wrote about that has their own little community there. And
okay.
So there's a benefit there, and at the same time, it's strange. I don't know. Maybe there's a divide. Maybe they're Polish people who are more insular that just want Poland to sort of stay on its own. And what would your perspective on that be?
Okay, so it's actually quite complicated because there's a lot more than two camps. There is the really nationalistic, not necessarily particularly virulently nationalistic, not necessarily particularly like Nazis, we want to conquer everyone nationalistic, but just, yeah, we are Poland, fuck you, nationalistic camp. But honestly, they are mostly retired people.
Right. So you're saying that they're basically older generations, older people.
Yeah. Essentially conservative, generally grandparents who just they're not used to all this international thing. They lived all their lives in a country that was mostly cut off from the world. They have their values, they will stick with them. But that's actually a surprisingly small amount of people, although they certainly exist. On the other hand, you have, on the other, I guess, extreme, you have people like the previous government, at least like the previous government was by the end of its 2 terms, because they've changed a lot. But essentially people who are all for the EU is best, hooray. I mean, it's kind of a childish way of describing that, but their position is childish. And then you have everything in between. Who would be important to talk about in between? I guess that there's the.
Would you say you're in between that, or? Seem to
Well,
be.
I'm in the camp that I'm going to describe right now.
Right.
So, uh, I'm in the camp that thinks that the EU is over,
Right.
and if we like it, whether we like it or not, it's probably going to crumble.
Hmm.
Just, I doubt there's going to be a sudden, huge event that's going to destroy the union. I think it's just going to fade away.
Yeah.
It's going to be like, what was it called? The UN before the UN, the one established after World War One.
Hmm.
I don't remember how it's called.
The
League of Nations, I
League
believe.
of yeah yeah
Yeah,
yeah
the League of Nations. The League of Nations still technically formally exists, if
yeah.
you can
Well, the
believe that.
United Nations is kind of an outcropping of
Yeah, the United Nations itself is also entirely useless and essentially dead, actually.
yeah. I mean, I don't
Uh,
think that's an accurate way of putting it.
I think, and there's a lot of people in Poland who think the same, I believe, that that's what's going to happen to the EU in a few years, maybe a decade, if we're very lucky or unlucky, depending on how you want to put it.
Hmm.
Um, and you just have to be pragmatic about it. Take
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, you have to be pragmatic.
There's a lot of people in Poland who just don't believe the union is going to exist anymore. At least not in the form it has existed. Not in the, oh, we want to be a federal state without really telling it openly, but yeah, we want to be a federal state
Hmm.
kind of way. Actually, come to think of it, a lot of what they did was more in the lines of a unitary state, actually, but that's not the story. Um, so there's a, and that's a lot of the young people, the kind of group that I was talking about just a couple of minutes ago. The youth that has essentially traveled between Poland, the western part of Europe, and back again.
Yeah. They
Most
just
of us,
they've lost faith essentially.
yeah, most of us are convinced that yeah, this is a shit show. It's gonna crumble. It's not even because I didn't want to say something along the lines of take what you can get and fuck off, uh, because I
But that's what it comes down to, right?
at some point that's what it comes down to, and honestly, I think that that's what most countries will have to do, whether or not they're Eastern or Western European,
Yeah.
because as I said, this project doesn't seem to have a happy ending at this point.
No. I
And
mean, you can think back and try to hypothesize if, you know, say Merkel, Chancellor Merkel, had not
mhm,
done her, we can do it. Let's just invite all these immigrants. I'm pretty sure that the immigration crisis, which I guess is still ongoing in many ways,
mhm,
it was the final nail in the coffin, in the proverbial coffin, and it allowed for things such as the Brexit result and different parties now, like the Front National in France, and to gain a foothold where otherwise they
certainly.
would not have had that opportunity. But yeah, I guess I share the Polish view. I mean, I have to move soon, but I decided I'm going to move within Germany
Mhm.
because it's just a lot more expensive changing countries, rather than
Well,
moving to
yeah,
Hungary or whatever, at least at the moment. So, you know, that's but eventually, yeah, if the EU just does fall apart, and I think it'll take a few years. I think 5 or 10 years is a good estimation. Maybe even 10 years.
probably.
10 years. I actually think it could go on in some form for another 10 years, some formal form, and then it'll just sort of
Yeah,
dissipate.
fizzle out. Yeah.
Yeah, fizzle out. A lot of us who just I guess I'm kind of EU neutral in a lot of ways, but I just realized, yeah, it's not going to continue. So you just got to make do and try to yeah, try to be pragmatic about it. But I mean, you see, I guess it's overreported, right? You see these
Mhm.
sort of rallies of Polish nationalists, just
That's all
scream,
bullshit.
yeah, yeah,
That's all bullshit.
yeah,
I mean, you can believe me or not, but and obviously I don't mean all. They have to film it somewhere. But It's bullshit.
Yeah.
I remember watching a Vice documentary on um, the what was it called again? The Independence March, they called it. It was the most reported thing about Polish nationalism,
Hmm.
where essentially year after year during the national celebrations, uh, well, essentially it started with football hooligans,
Yeah.
so it didn't start very well. Decided to do a rally one year of mostly football hooligans from around the country, um, because the previous government, I mean now the previous government, was really cracking down quite hard on them, and for good reason, to be honest. Uh, well, there was quite a few irregularities, I'd say, but still, um, for good reason in the end. And this escalated year after year into really, really lots of people marching each year, mostly in protest. Uh, most of them were protesting about. I'm sorry. Most of them were protesting. I can't talk.
T'es en français, si.
Non, non, ça ira, ça va. What I'm trying to get at is that essentially what it's evolved into was a small core of hooligans that organize it all, and lots and lots and lots of people who had nothing to do with the thing, the original thing, who just came to protests about different things. But the one thing uniting them was the thing that they were really, really pissed with the government at the time.
I mean,
And
Vice,
that
Vice,
was,
by the
yeah.
way, is very these days. These days, they used to be better, very unreliable
Oh, yeah,
in
I'd
what
say so.
they report. I'd say about
It's,
4 or 5 years ago, they produced some excellent stuff that was, I think, fairly objective. They're just trying to, but
oh,
now
yeah.
they've taken on a very left-leaning slant. They tried. It's sort of this. They're kind of effectively progressives or regressives or whatever you want to call them. But what do you think distinguishes your typical Polish person from, say, your typical Swiss or French person?
Well, the first most glaring thing was what I said. They're substantially less wealthy.
Yeah.
Um, the second thing is society is different. And I emphasize the fact that it's the second thing. The difference isn't as big, or the influence of the difference of the cultural difference isn't as big as the wealth discrepancy. Um, but I guess the wealth discrepancy is an obvious thing, so let's focus on the other part. Um, culturally, and here I speak just for Poland. I have no clue about any other countries of the so-called Eastern Bloc. Um, Poland has this Catholicism thing.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, it's it's not that most of Polish people are actively Catholic. That's bullshit.
Hmm.
That's just a gross oversimplification. Most, like city dwelling at the very least, uh, Polish people are just about as Catholic as a German, I'd say, which is not at all.
Hmm.
It's just that the cultural significance of the Catholic Church is very different. The
Well, I mean,
Catholic.
there's influence. I mean, in southern Germany, it tends to be very
Mhm,
Catholic, and then the more north you go, and there are even
mhm,
holidays that that are Catholic, and then
mhm.
their days off from work. But yeah, religion, I don't see much sort of Catholicism or any sort of Christian
Mhm.
expression in day-to-day life of Germany.
There's very little. Again, in the cities, the country maybe I don't know actually, but in the cities, no. And even in things like political speeches, uh, if you compare Polish politicians talking to any random American politician talking, there'll be a lot more about God in the American politician's speech. There will be nothing about God in, or at least most of the time, nothing about God in the Polish politician's speech. What the Polish politician might talk about is something along the lines of Catholic values.
I swear to God, man, or Zeus in this case,
Mm-hmm.
I was going to read. You just read my mind. I was literally thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
Catholic values, that it probably would emphasize something like the values of, so the cultural values and historical values of Catholicism, but they wouldn't directly talk about, Jesus is with
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I they kind of do that in Hungary too. I mean, they talk about it being a so-called Christian nation. Are they really pious? No, not really. I don't think so.
No, they're not. At
Um,
least not in Poland. I don't know about Hungary, as you said.
well, I don't think they're terribly pious in Hungary. Well, comparatively, maybe, I don't know. But the that's the thing. I mean, that's kind of religiosity in Europe in general.
Mm-hmm.
Seems to be in the way you're describing it in Poland as well, and to some degree in Hungary. I don't. That's a very American way, but nonetheless, it is
Yeah.
kind of a cultural stamp that you guys have. I mean, people think of Poland, they think of Catholicism and
Yeah, but
tradition and what have you. Mm.
yeah, but like I said, it's less of a actually religious thing and more of a cultural thing at this point.
Yeah, but
So,
certainly, if you talk about, say, like the Muslim hordes or
mhm.
whatever, any politician could reference, the Catholic traditions of Poland
Mhm.
as a sort of counterpoint to that. Look, we're a Catholic nation or whatever.
A
Um,
politician in Poland wouldn't do that, at least not a mainstream one.
right.
A journalist who's right wing will do that every Saturday.
Yeah.
Um, but that's also a specificity of Polish journalism. It tends to be very, let's just say, political correctness isn't a thing.
Well, that's kind of refreshing. I
Oh,
think,
yes, it is.
I don't
For
know.
me, who lives in France and reads like French newspapers, they're just so awful.
I've talked about this a lot on my channel. The the thing is, political correctness is very much the child of wealth and security, right? And
Yes.
we're getting back to this point here, but if you're poor, if you've been through tumultuous times, if you have a historical background of decades of
hmm
a oppressive political regime,
hmm
for one thing, I imagine even people who hadn't lived through the Iron Curtain period would know you didn't,
Oh, yeah, of course.
but certainly your parents did, and you probably know people who have done as well.
Oh, yeah, certainly.
Um, I think political correctness would be the last thing, because there was an active suppression of certain viewpoints during the communist era, and
Yes.
when you're secure financially, materially, when you feel, then that's when this mirage seems to overtake people, where they think, oh well, we need to make sure everyone is feeling okay. If poor people don't give a shit about that because they can't afford
They
it.
can't. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
You just can't care about that sort of bullshit if you have to earn a living. You just can't afford to. And well, if you lose your job in Poland, yeah, you'll get some kind of welfare check, but good luck living on that.
Oh yeah, I used to sub on my gaming channel, a Polish woman. I haven't heard from her in ages. She used to
hmm
like comments, and yeah, she said she was going to end up living on the street,
hmm
and because she lost her job or whatever. And no, generally speaking, that doesn't happen in Germany. You can, I guess, I've never been on welfare, but I guess you can just head down to the welfare office and get your benefits.
hmm
Yeah, but that's the thing. I think, and this is a terrible prediction on my part.
hmm
If there's a major economic crisis, another one that, I mean, it's ongoing, but another one that sort of mirrors what was going on in
hmm
2008 and 9, or there's just a sort of long-term slump,
hmm
if economic conditions become such that they're so pronounced that people become aware of their lack of material security, I think political correctness will almost automatically go out the window. I mean, already there's a lot of resistance. People are tired of it. I communicate sometimes with just normal blue pill people
Hmm.
who they say Stardust. I don't really know much about it, but man, I'm tired of these SJWs fucking up the video games, and it starts there. But there are many layers to this. But political correctness, I think, might naturally dissolve. Unfortunately, if Western European wealth dissolves as well. I and I'm
I.
not saying this is well. It
Mhm.
would be good to get rid of political correctness. The wealth wouldn't be such a great thing, but I I think that might be the only way to quote unquote defeat it. I've kind of used that as a metaphor, defeat political correctness, because a lot of the
To
things I'm interested
starvation,
in, well, it's
essentially.
not, it's not, it's really, it's a horrible
Sorry.
plan, really. The idea that, the only way you can get rid of political correctness is to make people so concerned about their own material security and wealth, to the point where they're worrying about where their next meal is coming from, that they're going to throw that out the window. But guarantee it, yeah, if and when that happens, nobody's going to care about political correctness. I mean, and you see this. I guess it's a bit off topic, but you see, I mean, political correctness as a kind of concept, just stems. It originally came out of the United States from, say, yuppie, well-to-do, spoilt children who
Yeah.
never worked a day in their life, and uh, it's a sort of very much a top to bottom phenomenon, and it might carry on in those circles, but I mean, the everyday person, as you pointed out, people in Poland, they don't have the time for it to worry about being politically correct.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
the same is true in Hungary, in my observation. And I think in my observation, not that I have a lot of contact with working class German people, I'm kind of a hermit, but
Hmm.
I can't imagine the German street sweeper with the earrings and the tattoos who looks like he gets drunk every night, really cares very much about political correctness either. So I think that'll just sort of naturally erode if the economy falls apart. But I mean, here's one question: do you think Polish people see themselves as part of a greater Europe, or do they see themselves as distinctly Polish? Because one of the ongoing debates, that's, if you want to call it a debate, that's very much contemporary in the YouTubosphere,
Hmm.
is with the alt-right. I mean, the alt-right is
Yeah.
kind of omnipresent. They're everywhere. I see, lots of people who call themselves sort of MGTOW, but also then somehow alt-right and whatever.
Hmm.
It's up
Yeah.
for them to decide. But um, the alt-right talks about a sort of European identity, and usually Poles aren't included in that. I'm
Hmm.
curious, what do you think Polish people, in general, and of course you can't speak for everyone, consider themselves as part of a sort of pan-European culture, or is it just a very much a Polish identity that's separate from others?
Well, there's two answers to that question, and very unfortunately, they're yes and no.
Okay.
And let me, um,
Ja pierdolę.
yeah. Um, let's perhaps start with the no part, because it's simpler.
Right.
Uh, Essentially, and also to tackle the alt-right, when anyone who lives in Poland hears about, well, who lives in Poland, anyone who has had a Polish upbringing, went to a Polish school, something like that,
Mm.
which I actually didn't, but well, uh, in my experience, um, when Poles hear about um, the alt-right's ethno-nationalism, the first question in their mind is, how do I shoot the guy before he shoots me?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is something that's not well talked about, but uh, the illustrious Führer, Hitler,
Hmm.
he had a he hated the so-called Slavs. I think there were 3 million non-military casualties in Poland alone of Polish people to the Nazis. Of course, I mean,
Yeah, ethnically Polish people, about
ethnically,
3 million, if
yeah.
you count, which is absolutely never done, but if you count, for some reason, but if you count by nationality, it's 6 million because the Jews count.
Well, I
Yeah,
mean,
it's a complicated thing.
Polish
Yeah,
Jews
it's a
weren't really
difference.
Poles. Most of them didn't even speak
Yes,
Polish. I mean,
yes,
they
yes,
they intentionally separated themselves from the Polish population,
yes.
which we can get into that, but
Well, that's a
they
huge
it's a
topic.
huge topic. But there was no. they intentionally separated themselves and living in their weird shtetl things.
Hmm.
And it's a very strange. I think the question of sort of Polish Jewry is a very strange one because they lived in Poland but had no connection to Poland or Polishness
Yes,
whatsoever,
yes,
which of course I think ultimately was negative for everyone, ethnic Poles, Jews, because
absolutely,
nobody could
absolutely.
connect as a result of that. Um, the Jews didn't trust so-called non-Jews, and
Hmm.
the Polish people thought, who are these people living here? We don't even, they're sort
Yeah,
of our
yeah,
neighbors, but not really.
yeah. It's
So
actually from someone who, again, has had a Polish education. Uh, when such a person comes to Western Europe, uh, a question that uh, one asks themselves just automatically when arriving here is, what the fuck are you people doing? You're just recreating the same thing here. That's gonna end well.
yeah, well, and
That's
I
gonna end
think this is
very
a
well.
valid point. I mean, it's not. You look at the case where, say, the highest casualty count of Jews was in Poland, obviously, but
Mhm.
it's not to justify, murder. But
Oh, absolutely
but
not.
the fact of the matter is, people don't like to mention this, but particularly Polish Jews, much less so German ones, but that's a
Mhm.
separate issue. Practice self-segregation. They, what if I recall the stats off the top of my head, something like 75% of Polish Jews didn't even speak Polish as a native language
Yes.
and barely could speak it. They spoke, Yiddish or Hebrew or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, that
Or
creates a
German even.
circumstance of estrangement. People, nobody can trust each other. The Poles don't. The Jew. I mean, I've seen actually, and Jews didn't trust Poles either. They were kind of
Yeah.
just living in their own neurotic little world.
Hmm.
This is not talked about in the mainstream, but it certainly contributed to a general level of mistrust, which prevented alliances that could have been
Absolutely.
very useful at the
Absolutely.
time against the Nazi
Absolutely.
invaders. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing that tends to happen when parallel societies form,
Yeah,
at
but
least as
this
far
is
as I
the
can
thing.
tell.
It's so funny because yeah, I agree with you that parallel societies are a huge issue.
Hmm.
But I mean, because it's not politically correct, nobody talks in particular about Polish Jewish parallel societies, which were
Hmm.
the most pronounced in Europe. Like I said, it really wasn't necessarily the case in Western Europe. I think generally speaking, they were much better, more integrated. A lot of the
Yeah,
Jews who
yeah,
fell to the Nazis actually considered themselves, Germans or Austrians or whatever.
yeah,
So
sure.
it's a bit more complicated, and it was this isolationism and
Hmm.
separatism on the part of Polish Jews, I think, absolutely contributed to the level of destruction that was wrought in Poland, and it made for difficult alliances. Um,
Yeah, it's less of a uh, because something that seems to reappear from time to time. Uh, well, maybe not in the news, but just online, uh, is this stereotype of oh, the Polish actively helped the Nazis kill the Jews. Yeah, no, that's bullshit.
no, of course it's bullshit.
Um,
Uh,
what they did generally, and again, it's really hard to estimate what actually happened. Like,
hmm,
the truth is the first victim of war, as they say, I believe.
yeah.
Uh, but what seems to have happened is there was a lot of, how to put it, essentially, because you had two parallel societies, the two parallel societies didn't help each other. They just helped the people
Well, this is the
inside
estrangement,
a.
right?
Yes,
If
exactly.
if
That's the
if
problem.
if Polish Jews had, kept some part of their religion, I guess, but otherwise had just decided we're
Integrated.
going to integrate it, spoke Polish as a native language, there could have been, I mean, maybe a lot more resistance, a lot less destruction of life. But of course,
Possibly, yeah.
yeah, I mean, because the narrative is framed, I mean, there's no denying, particularly in the West, there's an enormous sort of almost propagandist Jewish tilt on things. The idea that, I mean, this is bullshit. It annoys me too that Poles were somehow actively hostile to Jews living in Poland, when the reality is the Jews were hostile to everyone in the so-called shtetls were hostile to everyone who wasn't Jewish.
Well, it was
If,
certainly
and
a
if not
two-way thing.
hostile, just kind of removed and not really couldn't relate. And it's something that they don't really talk about because, well, because of a certain narrative, right?
Yeah, because this doesn't actually paint them as victims, or at least not only as victims.
Yeah, and this is kind of what bothers me about it's this thing the alt-right calls it the JQ, like the Jewish questions, that
Oh, okay.
you kind of have these extreme sides. You have this narrative that's sort of pumped out in the West that Jews are somehow
Oh, bullshit.
uniquely, yeah, well, of course it is. But then you have the alt-right are like, well, they're uniquely the source of all evil in the world. And so
Just as much bullshit.
exactly. The problem is you can't have a rational discussion because both sides are so polarized. I think we're trying to have a rational discussion about it, but both sides are so polarized about the issue that say nothing ill about Jews, whether it's participation in things like Bolshevism or even as an explanatory mechanism for the level of destruction in Poland, the fact that
Hmm.
they actively practice self-segregation to the point where they couldn't even speak Polish half the time.
Hmm.
Um, that's something that you couldn't really you can't say in the West openly. And once again, I'm going to stress I'm not saying that justifies
Absolutely not.
murder, but if you want to understand how things happen, and you need to explain things as they accurately are.
Well, essentially, what you're trying to say, very reasonably, I believe, is we're not victim blaming. We're trying to prevent it happening
Well, yeah, I mean,
again.
this is the problem with parallel societies, and
Exactly, it's
they
tribalism.
become this tribal, and it's neurosis. I mean, I don't want to get into the genetics, but let's just say culturally, particularly the Eastern European sort, like the Ukrainian and especially the Polish sort of Jewish culture, when I looking at it from the outside, just seemed incredibly neurotic. I mean, people living in essentially in little towns,
Yeah,
isolated. They couldn't speak the language of the country. Yeah, there are striking parallels between. I mean, arguably, they weren't actively harmful as Muslim terrorists blowing
oh yeah,
things
for sure.
up, but this is something that's not frequently talked about, and I think it's important you don't want a repeat situation, whoever the people might be,
Hmm.
but I think in the West, in particular, United States, and even and certainly Western Europe, it's not you can't have an honest conversation about this stuff. And what happens as a result is you get people with fantasies about like Jewish demons twirling their
Yeah,
mustaches in some bunker with controls throughout the galaxy pressing buttons. And so
yeah,
you just can't really seem to have an honest assessment of things. You can't just say, look, just like any other people in the world, there were Jews who did bad things, Jews who did nothing, Jews who did good things, whatever. They're just people, right?
of course.
But even Jews with their obsession with themselves, it strikes me as they they,
Well,
they almost invite this kind of polarizing narrative because they polarize
absolutely,
themselves,
absolutely.
and then this forces outsider people to think why this is why are they doing this? It's just and they're completely oblivious to it. You know how many conversations I've had to have, particularly with Israelis,
Hmm.
trying to explain that this attitude they have, they're living literally in a kind of neurotic prison of their own making, and
Yeah,
it just
it's
needs to
actively
change.
harming themselves.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I don't think they realize that, but it's a very strange and foreign mentality. And to be fair, I don't blame to some degree these people who then come up with these fantasies about every ill in the world is solved by get rid of the Jews. I mean, it's not that I support that by any means, but
Oh
it's
no, it's
just
ridiculous.
it's just that you can't have an honest conversation about it. And there are certain tendencies among Jewry to, I think, support sort of left-wing causes and multiculturalism,
Hmm.
and it is a bit. And then they practice their own isolationism in Israel. It's strange. I guess we've very much gotten off topic. Getting back
Yeah,
to the main
yeah.
topic of the Polish victims of the Nazi invasion.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, this was something I think that not many people talk about, obviously,
Hmm.
because, well, you're just, in air quotes just Poles, but
Hmm.
it's a. I wonder what the attitude of modern Poland is towards Germany, because I've talked a lot on this channel and elsewhere about
It's
this sort
very
of
surprising.
this sort of inherited, the
Hmm.
belief at least in inherited sin
Yeah, yeah.
and what have you. Yeah.
It's very surprising to most people,
Mm.
in my experience, um, because I think most people expect the Poles to absolutely fucking hate Germany,
Mm.
and the Poles don't absolutely fucking hate Germany. Uh, at least not in my experience. Uh, the Poles tend to fear Germany
Mm.
simply because it's more powerful, at least today.
They're going to
Uh,
take back Gdansk or something.
well, no, no, not necessarily like territorially,
Mm.
economically, just the possible influence of the German state over local affairs, let's say. Um, I mean, a common narrative among the press that supports the current government is that the previous government uh, was essentially a government of uh, vassals to Angela Merkel or whoever happens to be the chancellor.
Mm.
Uh, and I mean, I don't know how true that is. It's impossible to know, really, but a lot of Poles feel that way about Germany. Essentially, they fear its possible influence because lately in history it happened to be really, really bad.
Well, not only that, I mean, Germany is effectively the EU, and without
Yes,
Germany,
yes,
in a financial sense, there is no EU. And so
absolutely, absolutely.
it certainly makes sense that they're given historical circumstances, obviously. Of course, there are a lot of, strangely enough, pro National Socialist people who would say, well,
Hmm.
the, the Germans were just defending ethnic Germans against the evils of the Poles who executed them.
Oh, that's silly.
Right. I mean, yeah, no, there's that tribalism for you.
Yeah.
But I guess the original question before we got way off track, even though it was
Oh,
interesting,
yeah, yeah.
was, do Pol so you start off with the no because
Because
of
it's easier
basically
to
historical
explain.
circumstance, right?
Yeah.
And
Yes. Oh,
right.
oh yeah. Go on, go on.
And so we should get to the yes
Mm.
aspect. So what is the yes aspect?
The yes aspect is the other country that Poland actually really hates. Well, not Poland, the Polish. Russia. The
Yeah.
Polish hate Russia. The Polish don't hate Russians, but the Polish hate Russia. And just as a clarification, maybe, when I say the Polish, I don't necessarily specifically mean me. I'm trying to be as objective as possible for this conversation, and generally, I'm not particularly nationalistic, not at all, actually. But the Polish do hate Russia in general. Uh, if you're a Nigerian man who wants to go to have a vacation in Poland for some reason, you're not gonna be aggressed. You're not gonna be
Mm.
bothered. Probably. I mean, yeah, there's certainly a chance that some thugs will rough you up because you're easy prey because you're probably not from here.
Yeah.
But it's not because you're black. It's because you're not from here, obviously.
Yeah.
Uh, if you're a Russian who's wearing a "Hail Mother Russia" T-shirt, oh, you're gonna get fucked up.
Well, I mean, there's obvious historical precedents for this. It seems it's kind of strange if you think about it. On on the one hand, you have the West. Be wary of the West. Germany has this history. Germany is the centerpiece of the EU,
Mm-hmm.
and of course, I mean, during the Iron Curtain era,
Mm-hmm.
Russia or the Soviet Union was calling the shots. So it almost seems, in terms of this mistrust, that Poland is kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Very much so. I mean, at least from the perspective of the Polish, and
And
uh,
I think I just want to point
yeah.
that this is an interesting contrast to, my father's, and his father's country, and I
Mm-hmm.
guess my country, artificial
Mm-hmm.
country, Hungary,
Mm-hmm.
because Hungary definitely, in my estimation, has that distrust of Russians, at least historically, or what
Mm-hmm.
have you. But I don't think it feels the same hostility, but mostly because Hungarians were largely collaborators
Mm-hmm.
with the National Socialist regime.
Hmm.
rather than victims like the Poles were.
Hmm. Well,
So,
again, surprisingly, I guess the Polish generally seem to have this. Uh, I don't know if you can call it an opinion. Maybe an attitude
mm,
towards Germany uh, that boils down to as long as you don't interfere with us, you're perfectly fine. We can be good neighbors, no problem. As far as when you start to interfere in any minute way, fuck off immediately.
mm. And I think ultimately, probably that's what the fundamental problem is with the so-called migration or immigration of Poland, because these people interfere with sort of the basics of Polish society and just day-to-day life.
Well, here's the thing: no migrants are going to come to Poland.
Well, they don't. Yeah, you don't have any money. Why
Yeah,
would they?
no migrants are going to go to Poland. If Germany relocates migrants, I mean Germany, the EU, but practically Germany
Yeah.
relocates migrants to Poland, they're going to go to Germany
Oh yeah.
next Saturday
Yeah, yeah.
because they can. So, in practical terms, it's a non issue. And most reasonable people, I think, at least I hope, realize that in Poland. Uh, what is an issue is the symbolism of it.
Hmm.
Uh, because, again, it's Germany effectively calling the shots.
Hmm.
And as I said, Germany is perfectly fine and we can be lovely friends forever as long as you don't touch our shit. Because the last time you touched our shit, you killed 3 million of us for no good reason, really.
Right. Mark my words. People are going to
Mm-hmm.
dispute that. They're going to say that Polish people aggressed against
Oh
the
yeah, I'm
ethnic
sure.
Germans,
Well,
and yeah.
fuck yourselves.
Oh, fair enough. I mean,
I mean, maybe I wasn't there, but the records seem to say
well,
otherwise.
there are. Yeah. I mean, my understanding is that Hitler had issues with Slavs in general and Polish people specifically,
Well, he
and
had
he
a.
had his own
Mhm.
delusions that you know, the Polish people were part of this sort of grand Bolshevik plot to bring down Germany and what have you. But
It's kind of hard to know with Hitler because, well, we can't really know how much of his insanity was for real.
well, whether it was real or not, I mean, I'm just basing on what I know about what he claimed.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, that Poland was sort of de facto Bolshevik
Hmm.
territory or
Hmm.
whatever.
Yeah.
But and I think this is one thing that just there, even among European nations, there's just been so
Hmm.
much conflict. It's why there's no this idea, and I brought this up in my chat with some of these alt-right guys.
Hmm.
You can't have this sort of pan-European nationalism because nobody likes each other. I
Yeah,
mean,
everyone hates each other.
somebody I remember. I don't. Do you know Cultane and CS?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, they put out some really. I'm actually working almost done with a video to sort of complement their videos, but
Hmm.
they put out some interesting regression analyses on the impact of IQ and homogeneity.
Hmm.
And one of the things some guy made a response and he brought up something to the effect of, well, white people are going to get along with white people. Well, you look at a place like, I mean, you're well traveled, you're sort of an international guy who happens to originally be from Poland, but
Hmm.
you look at like a place like Belgium, which is sort of an artificial country. The
Hmm.
Flemish
Haven't been
people
there.
don't like, well, yeah, but you've heard of this surely. You
Yeah,
don't
of
like the
course.
Wallonians, who
Hmm.
are francophone French
Hmm.
speakers. There's even, they're not even allowed to join some clubs. I mean, allowed. They're not encouraged to.
Yeah.
So, and these people are probably, genetically pretty close. They probably look more or less the same. It's just European, but this is true of basically everywhere in the world. I mean, it's not really exceptional. It's just I just don't see, and this is ultimately also why the European Union will fail. Europeans don't really like each other. They don't, for
They don't
historical
see a
reasons.
common cause.
No, no, because there is none. And
I mean,
you,
they might work one out, but they're not gonna.
yeah, and exactly. And I mean, you can see. I mean, sometimes it happens. I mean, once again, I'll cite the Polish coming to the aid of the Viennese and
Hmm.
the siege of Vienna when
Oh,
the
there's.
Muslim Turks
I'm sorry to cut you out there, but there's a funny story about that no one ever talks about. And
about the siege of Vienna.
yes, about King Sobieski, the king who was at lead of the army.
Okay.
I believe it's true. I don't remember where I read it, so don't take this as gospel. But King Sobieski didn't want to help the Viennese; he wanted to help the Turks.
Interesting. All right. Well,
The
didn't work out for him then.
the Senate, well, it wasn't called the Senate; it was called the Sejm, the National Assembly of Poland, because Poland at the time was really a what you call that? A noble republic rather than a kingdom
Mm.
in all important ways. The king didn't want to help. He saw that as a stupid strategic move to help the Viennese. He wanted an alliance with the Ottomans and the French to essentially ransack the Holy Roman Empire. The nobles of Poland, who de facto ruled the country, they controlled the budget of the kingdom, didn't want that, and he couldn't persuade them because, oh no, we have to defend Christendom. I mean, they surely had more pragmatic reasons as well, but
Well, it's a good thing it worked out the way it did because I
probably.
mean, historically, that was the height of the Ottoman power, more or
Yes.
less.
At least their expansion in Europe.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, if you look at I mean, the last major Muslim threat, I mean, barring the current one right now, which is
Yeah.
ongoing, was in 732 AD by
Yeah.
the Moors pushing into France, stopped by
Martel.
Charles Martel, right? Martel, the Hammer,
Hmm.
and at
That's a
Poitiers.
horrible translation, by the way, but yeah.
Well, why is it? I mean, I believe his Latin name was Martellus, which means literally little hammer. But
Yeah. The funny thing is that the modern French don't really understand that as little hammer. They
Marteau.
understand they understand it as le vaillant, en gros.
Okay.
So it's
In
a
any event,
bizarre
that's my
clusterfuck.
point is that
Yeah. Sorry. Go on.
I mean, we literally have about 1,000 years between two major Muslim threats. Arguably, the Ottoman one was worse just because uh, this is a much more open area for them to invade through versus just going through from Spain through France.
At
Um,
least up until well, Vienna and the Alps.
right, and so I mean, however that whatever the ultimate reasons for the decision were,
Hmm.
I'm glad it worked out. I mean, Europe. If Europe had become some sort of I don't know Muslim principate, I think we all would have been a lot worse off.
That's very probable,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah, yeah. Well, I'm happy. If you look up, I don't even think they're functional mosques in Hungary these days. They're museums or just old buildings from the
Hmm.
17th century. That's pretty much it.
Hmm.
So I'm pretty pleased about that. But yeah, I guess Poland, like so many other, particularly Eastern European countries, it just has its own identity. I mean, if you want to summarize,
Hmm.
it kind of does its own thing, and it doesn't really feel common cause with the rest of Europe necessarily,
Well, no
unless
other
there's some.
country really does.
No, I suppose not. I
Maybe
mean,
Germany, but that's mostly because Germany sees the European Union, I think, as an extension of Germany.
it's possible. Certainly in mainstream German news outlets, it seems that way. I mean, you don't hear mainstream, and I mean really mainstream.
Oh yeah, and I
Euro,
did mean specifically the rulers, not the people. I don't know about the German people, but
yeah.
please continue.
Oh, I think I mean, your typical person, and I think I was talking to Teal dear about this, is that
Hmm.
people just want to get on with their lives. They don't want to think of the issues of Islam and the political
Of
fraction.
course not. People have no clue about politics.
So, the Germans I know, your everyday Germans, they're people I might game with online. They're
Hmm.
just normal people who do their 9 to 5 and want to get some games in the evening.
Of course.
They don't, I never talk to them about these issues, if only because I have I try to keep the things I do and the work I do separate from, gaming interactions for them for obvious reasons. But
Yeah.
mainstream politicians and mainstream media outlets, they're definitely pro EU
Hmm.
ostensibly. But look, if enough things happen, if we have a continuous stream of attacks, if there's a massive, massive attack where hundreds of people die rather than just 10 or 5, eventually we're going to get to the point where, yeah, it'll get bad enough, and they'll have to react, and they'll have to react in a way. Already, the leader of the left uh, has talked about, and this is a left-wing person,
Hmm.
the failure of the chancellor to address some of these ongoing issues, and
Yeah.
so until human beings overcome things like tribal identity, which I
Good
guess
luck.
that's not going to happen, which is of course the main argument of the alt-right. We should all be tribal and hate everyone else, or at least be distrustful of everyone else because
That's a
reasons.
very simplistic approach to it too.
Yeah, I mean, this is my problem. I think it's like with so many issues, be it the Jewish question or
That just sounds horrible in
yeah,
both
I know, but
sides.
that's what they call it. So I don't know
Yeah,
what else to
I mean, it's
it's
accurate.
it's a
It's an accurate
replication
description.
of the die Judenfrage, a
Yeah,
German term that they used during the NS period. But
of course.
I mean, it's just whether it's that issue or really just half a dozen other issues. It's always this extreme polarizing thing, and then you get the other extreme, like mainstream, where nobody wants to talk about anything.
Yeah,
Be
and it
it
becomes
migrants or whatever
yeah,
the issue might be.
it becomes a
Um,
zero-sum game, and you just can't have a conversation because you're either a
precisely.
Nazi or you're either a cock, I believe.
A cuck, a Nazi,
And there's
you.
nothing in between. There's no half cock, half Nazi. That's
Yeah, is that the position we should be striving for? Half cucked, half Nazi. I don't know if
well,
that's a great title to take on, but
it sounds interesting.
it does sound interesting. I'll grant you that. Half cuck, half Nazi. I'll have to think about that one. But yeah, I think this is the problem in politics today is that you just can't have an open discussion without extremely polarizing, I think inaccurate on both sides, oftentimes,
Oh,
positions on
yeah.
things. So yeah, I don't know what the solution is there, other than to get people of sound mind and reasonable persuasion to just say to try to have a more balanced discussion on some of these issues, which tend to be pretty polarizing. But I don't think that's going to happen anytime
Well,
soon.
how would I put it? My question would be, why in the world would politicians actually start to talk about these things? There's absolutely no reason for them to start talk about those things.
If the electorate demanded it, then
And why would the electorate demand it?
true enough, most
The electorate will demand, we want more cheese because there's no more cheese. We want more
that's
bread
true.
because there's no more bread.
That's true. Simple,
I mean,
simple, simple. That's true.
I don't know. I don't even know if it's necessarily simple. It very well might be as well. But your average Joe that you mentioned, the guy who works his 9 to 5, whatever, how much time per day does he have to go through the news? To
All right. I mean, it's kind of a luxury. I mean, when I used to
absolutely.
work in an office and I had to. It was more like 9 to 6, and I'd
Hmm.
come back and I would just want to relax,
Of
play some
course.
games. I didn't, now because I run a channel and make a lot, majority of my income off of it, I'd say, I try to do research. I try to keep up with these things, but
Yeah.
it's almost part of my job. It's not, I
Yeah.
can't,
People just don't have time
yeah,
to
yeah,
care.
absolutely, absolutely.
People
That's
just don't have time to care. And if people don't have time to care, why would politicians address these points? They would be addressing points that don't exist in the public mind.
yeah.
So that they're not going to get them votes. So even if the politician would have all the solutions, if he tells us about the solutions, no one's going to listen because
Mm.
no one's going to know what he's talking about. He has to spout some bullshit about, I don't know, more welfare for the, I don't know, someone. Choose your.
Well, look, that's why these conversations about so-called controversial topics will always be relegated to the dark, dank corners of the internet. We're never,
Unfortunately.
unfortunately. I think though there is a push. I mean, look, everyone's biased to some degree, but
Oh, of course.
I try to just look at things from a open perspective. I try to look at all the sides. I think Teal Deer, for example, generally tries to do that.
Excellent channel.
Sargon, well, he's politically correct a bit too much. I mean, I understand, fears for his income. I get it. But
Hmm.
I think there is a slight trend. There are some people we're trying to just look at many of these issues in a way that isn't just laden and oversaturated with a particular bias.
Hmm.
I mean, I had a conversation with a guy in the alt-right who was, accusing me. Look, nobody's perfect, and I'm human. I have my biases too, but I do try to just look at things as I can just see them as they are, rather than
Hmm.
as what I want them to be. And I think if
As
we
you
get
should.
more people who can look at these things from that perspective, whether it comes to questions of nationality or the EU or whatever it might be, then we're on the right track at least. And even just small numbers of people moving in that direction is, I think that's a good thing. It's better than hiding away from it all and not willing to engage in discussion on these topics.
That is a distinctly non-MGTOW approach to the matter.
A distinctly non-MGTOW approach, do you think?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I mean that's the other thing.
You have hope. That's not MGTOW.
Oh, I don't have hope. I don't have hope. I mean, hope is a weird word. I don't really endorse that word, but
No,
the
I'm
point.
joking, of course,
Well,
but
yeah, of course, yeah. But I mean, it's just how else are you going to understand the world
no,
unless you
no,
just try to take off the
I agree.
blinders and,
I
and, and try
absolutely
to just say, okay, what's the deal here? Here are these circumstances, or here's a set of data. What can we understand about it? Is there information about this or not? There's just a lot of these questions.
absolutely just trying to be factual.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm actually almost done with a video. I'll be out in the next few days on this. I'll give you another example. The alt-right. They're always talking about like East Asians being less creative and having a
Oh my
narrower
God.
IQ bell curve. I looked for information. There's no data to back it up, and I put out I'm actually working on a video talking about this where I just say, look, there's nothing to back this up, so it probably isn't true.
Yeah, I think I've
Um,
seen the video, and
no,
I
I
mean,
haven't put it out yet. I'm
oh, okay,
working on
okay,
it right
sorry.
now. It's actually an extension of some of the work that Coltane and CS has done.
Okay,
It's sort
okay.
of a final account, but I don't know. I don't claim to be far from perfect, nor do I claim to be particularly perceptive or intelligent. But I try to not look at things at biases, and I think I personally would just encourage people to do that because if you're interested in arriving at an accurate conclusion that isn't just full of a particular ideology or flavor of ideology, take your pick, then yeah, I mean, there's no other way to do it.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
of course, that tends not to work very well for the ego. You know, people like their ego stories because it makes them feel good about it. So I don't really know. People run off of emotion. I think less emotion would be a good thing in a lot of these cases. But we definitely kind of covered a whole bunch of topics, and we kind of bounced off. Not necessarily a bad thing, bouncing in between different topics. Um, not so sure we necessarily talked enough about Poland, but I mean, I suppose we could do
Yeah.
that at a later date. But
Well, if you want,
we
I'm
did cover a
available.
wide variety of subjects. Maybe
You
just
know
brief.
what? Yeah,
Sorry.
go on. Go on.
Kurwa, ja pierdolę. Okay, go on.
Okay, great. What I was going to say is just maybe I'll rapidly finish the yes, why the Polish think themselves part of a greater Europe point,
Okay,
because I never actually managed
there you
to
go.
get to there.
There you go.
Uh, um, so, as you mentioned, uh, the so-called Eastern Europe, I generally find that term to be very bizarre because
It's weird. I
it's
think,
artificial. It's very artificial.
yeah, it's a legacy. It's
Historically,
a legacy of the communist era, of
yeah,
course.
yeah, yeah. It's the legacy of last half century. Before that, it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Uh, but let's just stick with it. Um, as you mentioned, a lot of those Eastern European countries did face a lot of raiding and conquest, at least for some time, uh, by ostensibly foreigners, people who are very foreign, not just oh, he's English, I'm French, he's a foreigner,
Mm,
uh, like Mongols or Turks
yeah.
or well, okay, these are the best
Yeah.
examples I have, but that's enough because these were really, really big threats, and uh, through that, at least in Poland, what seems to have um, happened in the culture is that it essentially enshrined the Catholic Church as the defining factor of, okay, this is our tribe. Again, this tribalism thing.
Mm.
And these other guys who pray to either Allah or, I don't know, the Sky Father,
Hey, don't
whoever.
diss the Sky Fathers.
Yeah. Uh, they're them. Now we know they're them. Or even the Muscovites, in Poland's case, who pray, yeah, they pray to God, but their cross is kind of different.
Mm.
Um, it's ultimately meant, and it also played a large part in Poland's struggle, I guess, with communism. The Catholic Church was not necessarily the institution itself, but the symbol of it ended
Right.
up being a focal point of, okay, this is our identity, and these other bastards over there, we know that they're not us because they don't pray to this particular cross.
Right.
Uh, and what this meant in the long run, I think, as at least as far as people's understanding of who they are, this again tribalistic us and them thing. Most Polish people, especially in the media, where you have to watch out what you're saying, uh, would be, and I do mean the normal people, if you will, would be insulted if you say like, oh, you're not like the Western Europeans,
Yeah. Well.
because I mean, to a large degree, that's true. They're not like the Western Europeans.
Mm.
But a key feature of their identity historically has been, we are Western Europeans, and these other guys are not.
Yeah. I mean, through Catholicism,
Yes,
I
exactly.
totally get that. I mean, of course, you know, the tribalism gets the worst. I mean, there's a lot of shit from the alt right about not singing the praises of tribalism
Hmm.
when they're just depressed economic conditions. I mean, like the hostility towards Poles in the UK because they're taking jobs. It's almost always comes down to that.
Yes,
Um,
most conflicts come to that
yeah,
at
yeah,
some level, at least.
absolutely. Do you think that given the fact that you spent so much time abroad in places like Switzerland
Hmm.
and France and if I
And
recall right,
Tunisia,
you and where?
and Tunisia.
Oh gods, that's not good, I guess. But
Oh no, it was okay. It was a walled-off community.
yeah, there you go. But you attended, I believe, an English-speaking school.
A French-speaking school, actually.
Oh, pas les deux. Okay. Um, so okay, well, fair enough. In any case, your English is excellent, but
Well, thank you.
it I guess you don't have a typical Polish perspective, I guess, in some ways.
Well, I'm sure in a lot of ways not.
I mean, I hate to draw an analogy. It's like someone coming up to me as an American and then asking for American perspective when I am just
I'm certainly not. I'm
all
certainly
over the
not the
map,
typical
kind
Pole.
of.
Uh, no, I see what you mean there, but what I'd say is I'm certainly not a typical Pole,
Hmm.
but I'm quite typical of my generation, at least a good bit of it.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. I mean, I don't. I mean, as far as I don't think someone could interview me as an American. I don't even like even as an American, I would first call myself a New Yorker before I called myself an American. So that's even
Yeah, but
more
America's
complicated.
big.
Yeah, it's
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 really
just it's a
big.
strange, so I it's hard to. But on the other hand, I think without your international perspective, it would be very difficult to gain a sense of what's going on because
I would imagine, yeah.
people who live in bubbles, let's say we, found a pure a pure Pole who never left the motherland or whatever. I
It would be much harder for you to communicate with him.
Oh, absolutely, and I think his perspectives would might be more representative of a Polish person living there, but would also lack a breadth of perspective that is useful sometimes
But
in looking at these issues.
well, if I may, I'd imagine his perspective, and it would go for any nationality or any group for that matter of this kind of insular, never left his village or whatever person would probably be in a way typical, but also would almost certainly lack any amount of object. I don't want to sound. Yeah, okay, I'm going to go with objective. Any amount of objective analysis about what his opinions are and why they are as they are. It's unfortunately, in my experience, something that tends to happen with, well, people just like that. Like you describe people who never really left their country. And, well, if I may be a bit rude to my Swiss friends, that's a very Swiss thing, for instance.
Oh yeah, I lived in Switzerland for about half a year.
Yeah.
They always perceived me as a German, so they didn't like me for that reason. But
yeah,
you know, but yeah, it's strange. But look, I think we covered a lot of ground. Maybe at some point in time, I mean, you don't have to be a Frenchman to. There's a lot of crap going on in France. We don't have the time to cover it right now, but
oh, absolutely.
I mean, it sounds to me like you're planning your imminent departure. But
well, we'll see how things are in, let's say, a year.
Right.
And as I said, I don't see it changing for the better, but maybe I'm wrong. So it would be rash to make a decision just now.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe as a finishing accent, just the other day, there was a slew of articles, really through the entire spectrum of political leanings in the French press, and even in the English-speaking press about France, essentially announcing that, oh, France is on the brink of civil war because of the Front National, who is evil and horrible.
French media is insanely biased. It's so saturated with
it's such bullshit.
With left-wing propaganda.
Don't get me wrong, the Front National is
they are left. I mean, different kinds of left. I mean, sorry, nationalist left versus socialist. Sorry, nationalist left versus, I don't know, multiculturalist left. I don't know what to call them, but you know.
Well, I tend to go with left-wing nationalists and right-wing nationalists.
No.
But I mean, well, not to describe these particular groups. The progressives, if I may use that word, they're probably something like internationalists. But the problem with internationalism is that it, in the end, boils down to extremely aggressive nationalism, because it essentially just, I mean, if I may present my opinion at least, internationalism tends to be exactly like nationalism on steroids. It's essentially the same thing that Adolf Hitler did, just veiled a bit. Because in the end, it's an imperial ideology. It's an ideology that claims that, oh, our way is the best, and oh, you can be your own country if you will, as long as you follow our way.
No.
If you don't follow our way, oh, you're a horrible Nazi, and we can kill you. Well, maybe not kill you, but
yeah, you know, malign you and all that sort of thing. Yeah, no, it's a mess. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but at least we got some insight into Poland. I was in Poland years ago. I need to visit again at some point in time, but in my old age, I'm just less inclined to travel. So,
well, there's nothing in particular to see, to be honest. But I guess you're welcome.
You know, there's some pretty cities, you know, Krakow and Gdansk or Danzig.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth a trip at some point in time. But
well, it's not very expensive.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, fair enough. All right. Well, I want to thank my guest John Doe for offering a wealth of information as we bounced around. I think ultimately interlocking and related topics, and we covered a fair bit of ground, if not with a degree of necessarily thoroughness, but certainly covered a fair amount of ground. And I want to thank him again for being here. And he's quite a remarkable young guy. So thanks for being with me. Merci beaucoup, monsieur. And n'oubliez pas d'abonner.
Bon, bah, maintenant, je suis obligé de le faire.
C'est ça, hein. J'ai dit la vérité, hein. Anyway, I'll check you guys out later, and more material to come, as always, assuming I'm not dead, indigent, or homeless. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.